Stand by for action.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dave Miller. I am the unpleasant blind guy. Sometimes, when a writer puts together an opinion piece, they get a case of selective amnesia because they want to get their point across. That's true of an article by Louis Pennock, published in the Bristol Post on Monday, March the 6th, 2017, with the headline, "The Far Right Forgot Mosque Attacker's Criminal Past While Spewing Bigoted Bile Against His Sentence." And Americans, I want you to pay close attention to this too, because extremist attacks on free speech and expression of opinion are occurring worldwide, including in the United States, and we are only about one election cycle away from having similar events happen in our own country. The subhead, "Dozens of far-right protesters marched on Saturday against the jail sentence handed to a man who tied bacon to the door handles of a mosque. Bristol Post journalist Louis Pennock gives his opinion on the demo." Pretty dramatic, eh? Well, let's get into it. A far-right group marched in fury this weekend against the one-year jail term handed to a man who tied bacon to the door handles of a mosque in Bristol. I'm going to stop there just to say that it was more than one group, possibly 8, and the characterization of far-right is frankly only an opinion on this man's part. What they were not was pro-Islam. So, to him, they were quote-unquote far right. But as you can see, he immediately begins the story with an inaccurate statement. About 50 demonstrators, some masked, gathered in condemnation of the, in half quotes here, outrageous sentence handed to Kevin Crean after he threw bacon at Jamia Mosque in Tottenham and abused elderly worshippers. All right, let's clarify that one. First, there were more than 50 demonstrators. Second, some of those demonstrators were masked, because if people are seen to be opposing Islam in the United Kingdom, they can lose their job or even their children. The government is that much on the side of Islamization. As for the supposed abused elderly worshipper, Mr. Crean did shout insults at a worshipper, but that hardly qualifies as physical abuse. To get back to the story. They furiously denounced the British justice system, chanted Islamophobic slogans, and clashed violently with an anti-fascist countermarch. Again, Mr. Pennock has a little problem with accuracy here. First of all, the term Islamophobia is in and of itself a phony creation of politically correct academics to silence criticism of Islam. Secondly, there was a heavy police presence at this event. If the violent clashes that Mr. Pennock and others talked about had occurred, there would have been arrests. There were no arrests. To continue with the story. They claimed to be angry because Crean died in prison while serving a sentence they felt was unjust. He was found dead in HMP Bristol in December, with police later calling the circumstances not suspicious. Well, let's stop to say that is accurate. The police did call the circumstances not suspicious, but if you listen to my earlier programs, Suspicion, you will realize that that too is only a matter of opinion, and I am on record as saying that I, for one, am not trustful of law enforcement's conclusion in this case. To continue with the story. The demonstration was encouraged by the likes of former English Defense League leader Tommy Robinson, who fueled the fire when he tweeted that Crean should never have been in prison. And I'll stop to say that Mr. Robinson no more fueled a fire with his tweet than Mr. Pennock has with his little article. To continue with that little article. The consensus was Crean was handed such a harsh punishment by a politically correct justice system because his crime was against a mosque, and that a Muslim in a similar position would be treated much more leniently. I'll stop to say that's a good consensus, as things like that occur in the UK all of the time. But as you're about to see, Mr. Pennock disagrees. To continue. But in taking to the streets and spewing their bigoted bile, at one point chanting, "F*** Islam," the horde... Sidebar, let me stop here. Horde? I thought Mr. Pennock said there were only 50. Since when did 50 constitute a horde? Let me continue. The horde seemed to forget his string of previous convictions, which undoubtedly influenced the term. I'll stop here to say that this was probably about the time that Mr. Pennock was rubbing his hands in glee and going, this'll get him. Well, I'll leave it to you to see if this gets him. Let's continue with the story. The 35-year-old was a convicted football hooligan. Among other things, he had previous for assaulting a police officer. He had once been caught carrying a sawn-off pool cue down his trousers, and he was barred from going within a mile of Ashton Gate, Bristol City's football ground. And I'll do a little sidebar here and say, absolutely none of that has anything to do with placing some bacon sandwiches around a mosque and draping a St. George's flag there. Completely unrelated. Or, as we say here in the United States, Mr. Pennock, sorry Charlie, only the best tuna get to be star-kissed, and you've passed your sell-by date with that one. But as you'll see, Mr. Pennock hangs his whole point off of that string of previous crimes. Continuing with the story. Crean had been before the courts for these crimes. This isn't a comment on his character. Let me stop here and say, of course it's a comment on his character. This entire piece is designed to defend the iniquitous British legal system by smearing the character of Kevin Crean. What you just heard from Mr. Pennock, folks, is an outright lie. To continue. But the angry mob should consider his criminal past before using this sorry episode to protest against a supposedly corrupt judiciary. And I'll stop here to say that there is nothing supposedly about it, which I will point out momentarily. To continue. Their response to Crean's sentence, after news of his death broke, slammed, in half quotes, liberal politically correct judges. Some used social media to complain of one law for us and one law for them. That, again, is in half quotes, guys. Now, let me explain about that for a second. When someone puts things in half quotes, that's the non-visual way of twiddling your fingers in the air and doing air quotes. It's a way to diminish or dismiss the person making the statement. To continue, them, presumably referring to non-white people, and I'll have to stop again and say that when people complain about the justice system in the United Kingdom, they're not complaining about a color gap. They're not complaining about whites versus blacks, as Mr. Pennock is trying to imply. They're complaining about Muslims versus non-Muslims. Clearly, in the UK, non-Muslims receive harsher sentences than Muslims for the same offenses. If you do your research, as Mr. Pennock should have done his, you'll find that what I'm saying is true. And I'll give an example or two in a bit. To continue with the story. While others bemoaned the fact you can burn poppies and get away with it, which, by the way, you can't. And I'll stop there to say, unless you're a Muslim. And when they say get away with it, what they mean is that you'll actually walk out of a court with a fine, and not a prison sentence, that will certainly result in your bodily injury, and now, as we know, can possibly result in your death. To continue. There are plenty of lenient jail terms which leave the public scratching their heads, but this shouldn't be one. The truth in this case is the court was presented with a man who had a long criminal past, and it dealt with him accordingly. Tommy Robinson and his followers should consider that before using the case to fuel their barmy conspiracy about a justice system and a country pandering to Islam. Okay, guys, that's the end of that story. and I want to hit a few points that Mr. Pennock was talking about. First, let's get into those lenient sentences that Muslims get, but that Mr. Pennock implies don't exist, or rather, which Mr. Pennock will not admit exist. Let's get into the sentence inequities. I'll give you a couple of examples. While Kevin Crean was given a year for placing bacon and a St. George's flag in certain points around a mosque, the same judge sentenced a Somali Muslim to only 2 years for raping a non-Muslim girl. As one of 5 Muslim child rape gang members, Itafak Youssef, age 26, of Stanley Street, Rochdale, was convicted in February of 2017 of sexually assaulting one girl and inciting another to engage in sexual activity. He was sentenced to 18 months in jail and received an additional 2-month sentence for a separate case of possessing and distributing an indecent image of a child. Then there's Rezaz Abdullah, who got an 8-month suspended sentence after he spat in the face of a non-Muslim infant and then told her mother white people shouldn't breed. The excuse for this one? Abdullah has, get ready for this guys, because you seem to hear this a lot when it comes to Islamic terrorists, regardless of the scale of their crimes, mental issues, and needs to be free to continue his mental health treatments. Now let's tackle Mr. Pennock's implied assertion that the British government in general and the British justice system in particular does not specifically pander to Muslims. A former counterterrorism sergeant attacked the London Metropolitan Police for failing to tackle extremist views among some of its Muslim officers for fear of being labeled Islamophobic. Mr. Pennock seems to enjoy using the word bigoted. Well, speaking as someone who's been a victim of hate crime myself, I think I can spot bigotry. I've seen it in both its overt and covert forms. And to my mind, there is no ideology more bigoted, even more bigoted than the progressive left, than that of Islam. One example of that would be that there are 10 countries around the world where a person can be executed for being a homosexual. All 10 of those countries are predominantly Muslim. Does this bigotry get into our societies? Absolutely it does. The Muslim terrorist Omar Mateen put the following on Facebook while inside the Orlando, Florida club during his attack with dead and dying bodies around him. The real Muslims will never accept the filthy ways of the West. So it seems that Mr. Pennock's rather inaccurate politically correct pop guns are aimed in the wrong direction if he intends to take on bigotry. So where does the bigotry of Islam come from? You can find it in one key text from the Hadith and Sirah. This is from the Sahih Bukhari 52:260. The Prophet said, if somebody, meaning a Muslim, discards his religion, kill him. Now most people think that's about apostasy, but honestly guys, it's about everything else when it comes to Mohammedans and those who do not practice the ideology of Islam. It speaks to the rape, it speaks to the torture, it speaks to the enslavement, all of the outrages committed on non-Islamic people by the followers of Islam. If you're not a Muslim, you're not a person, and therefore not worthy of common human respect or consideration. Proof to all this is located in articles that you can find at UBG Contact on Twitter. That's where you can contact me with comments, questions, show suggestions, awesome American suggestions, more examples of inaccurate pseudo-journalism. It is the main contact point for the show. But Mr. Pennock doesn't seem to recognize these things. He and those who support the Islamization of civilized countries around the world would pretend to bury their heads in the sand and declare loudly that everything is okay, and that anyone that has a problem with anything that might be going on obviously has their own issues and should be dealt with in various ways. Either socially ostracized, locked up in prisons, or hey, maybe even eliminated. You see, folks, after you dig into the facts, though Lewis Pennock may work for the Bristol Post, his article was long on opinion and short on journalism. And that's it for this time. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for listening, and may your God go with you. Goodbye. The Unpleasant Blind Guy is copyright 2017. Anno Domini.